Quit your bullshit. The words sliced through Congress like a thunderclap. Gasps erupted. Cameras locked in. Jasmine Crockett stood unflinching, her voice the spark that dared to challenge a sitting president. Donald Trump froze, fury in his eyes as millions watched the unthinkable unfold live. 9 seconds to shatter his composure. 46 seconds to turn the chamber into chaos. This wasn't debate. This was war. Truth colliding with power in the most explosive showdown of the decade. And war demands a battlefield. The battlefield tonight was no wasteland of smoke and fire. It was the marble heart of the United States Capitol. The chamber echoed with the restless murmur of lawmakers, reporters, and aides, all aware they were about to witness something history would never forget. At the center of it all, Donald J. Trump, the 45th President of the United States. Still draped in the aura of power, still wielding the weight of his title, still exuding the confidence of a man who believed he was untouchable. He entered like a storm cloaked in arrogance. Every step thundered with defiance. Every smirk carried the unspoken threat that his enemies would be crushed beneath the heel of his authority. Trump stood at the podium, shoulders square, chin lifted high, and the crowd stilled as if gravity itself bowed to his presence. With his voice booming, he declared, "This is my nation, my legacy. My word is law." For a moment it seemed the entire chamber tilted toward him, as though his gravitational pull could not be resisted. His supporters leaned forward eagerly, the faithful intoxicated by his bravado. His detractors clenched their jaws, bracing for the storm. But the storm had not yet arrived, because at that very instant, the chamber doors opened. She walked in. Jasmine Crockett, congresswoman, attorney, relentless fighter. Her heels struck the polished floor with the rhythm of inevitability, each step cutting through the suffocating fog of Trump's dominance. Her presence was not loud, but it was undeniable. Eyes locked onto her, whispers ricocheted off the chamber walls. And yet, she never flinched. Her gaze was fixed, unwavering, on the man at the podium. In her hands, she carried not just folders of paper. She carried the weight of truth. Sealed inside was a classified file, a dossier that whispered of corruption, betrayal, and secrets Trump had spent years burying beneath layers of lies. The chamber seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere a camera shutter clicked. Somewhere else a pen stopped moving mid-sentence. Every soul in that room felt the shift, the tectonic crack in the floor of American politics. Trump's smile faltered for the briefest second, a flicker of recognition flashing in his eyes. He knew what she held. He knew what it could mean. But arrogance is armor, and he wrapped himself tighter in it. He laughed, loud, dismissive, venomous. "Congresswoman Crockett," he sneered, his words dripping with disdain. "Do you really think a few sheets of paper can shake me? Do you really think you can stand against the President of the United States?" The room trembled with the force of his words. His allies cheered, pounding fists on their desks, turning the chamber into an echo chamber of approval. Theatrics. Power play. Trump was a master of it. But Jasmine did not waver. Her eyes burned with a fire no cheer could extinguish. She raised her head slowly, her silence heavier than his thunder. And then, she placed the folder on the table before her with deliberate calm, as though lowering a sword into the ground before battle. Every move was a declaration. Every second stretched, pulsing with the electricity of what was to come. Trump leaned forward, his voice dropping into a growl. "You think you're ready for this war?" Jasmine finally spoke. Her voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. Every word was sharpened steel. "This isn't war," she said, her gaze locking onto his. "This is justice, and justice doesn't bow." The silence that followed was suffocating, not a cough, not a whisper. Not a shuffle of papers, just the deafening weight of two forces colliding in a chamber that had seen centuries of battles, but never one quite like this. Trump's hand gripped the podium, knuckles white, jaw tight, the mask of confidence beginning to fracture. Outside, cameras rolled. Across the nation, millions watched live. Screens lit up with hashtags, with breaking news banners, with the kind of urgency that makes history pulse in real time. And yet in that room, all that existed was the clash of two figures, one draped in power, the other armored in truth. The storm had broken, the thunder roared, the war had begun. But as Jasmine Crockett stood tall, dossier in hand, eyes never leaving her adversary, one thing became undeniable. For the first time in years, Donald Trump looked afraid. Fear breeds fury, and fury was Trump's weapon of choice. He straightened his shoulders, adjusted his tie, and forced a sneer across his face. His voice cracked through the chamber like a whip. "Look at this," he bellowed, spreading his arms wide as if commanding an empire. "A little nobody from Texas thinking she can bring down the greatest president this country has ever seen." His supporters erupted. Fists pounded desks, cheers ricocheted off the marble walls. The roar was deafening, a wave of sound meant to swallow Jasmine whole. But she didn't flinch. Trump leaned forward, eyes narrowing, words dripping with contempt. "Do you really believe you can challenge a dynasty? You're nothing but a footnote, a fragile voice in a chamber that belongs to me." And the room trembled under the weight of his arrogance. Theatrics were his shield, and he wielded them mercilessly. Every insult, every roar, every jeer from his loyalists was designed to humiliate her, to remind the world of his dominance. Cameras zoomed in, capturing the storm. Screens across America flickered with breaking headlines. "Trump mocks Crockett, live in Congress." "Little nobody. President slams Democratic rising star." The press scribbled frantically, every word dripping with the scent of scandal. Outside the Capitol, crowds gathered before massive screens, chanting, shouting, waiting for the spark that would ignite the blaze. And yet, in the very heart of the storm, Jasmine Crockett stood in silence. She didn't respond. She didn't lash back. She simply smiled, a subtle curve of her lips, a glint in her eyes. It was the kind of smile that carried weight, the kind of smile that whispered of secrets yet to be unleashed, the kind of smile that told the world she was holding the winning card. Trump faltered for half a breath, catching it. His voice rose louder, desperate to regain control. "What's that smirk? Do you think you're clever? Do you think anyone takes you seriously? You're a fraud, just like your so-called evidence." He jabbed a finger in her direction, veins pulsing at his temple, sweat gleaming beneath the lights. Theatrics now edged with desperation. The chamber roared with chaos. Some lawmakers shouted over one another, allies and opponents clashing with words, their voices colliding into a storm of noise. The speaker's gavel banged again and again, but order was a dream fading in the hurricane. And Jasmine? She remained motionless. Her silence became louder than his fury, because silence in that moment was defiance. Silence was strength. Silence was a blade hidden beneath velvet. Reporters exchanged nervous glances. Viewers at home leaned forward, breath held, sensing something seismic about to break loose. Trump's eyes darted nervously, if only for a flicker. The smile unsettled him. It told him she was not trapped. She was waiting. Finally, Jasmine raised her head, tilting ever so slightly, as if studying a man cornered by his own pride. And though she still hadn't spoken a word, her body spoke volumes. She was not the hunted, she was the hunter. The chamber began to shift. Murmurs grew louder, uncertainty rippling across the faces of those who once cheered Trump's bravado. The spell of his dominance was cracking, if only at the edges. Cameras caught the close-up of Jasmine's calm expression, broadcast to millions. Her silence became the story. Her smile became the weapon. On social media, hashtags erupted like wildfire. The smile, shocked out Crockett vs. Trump, shock out truth. In silence, commentators scrambled to keep up with the narrative. What did she know? What was she holding? What could possibly give her the audacity to smile in the face of a man who devoured his opponents whole? Trump slammed the podium again, his voice breaking into a roar. "Answer me! Do you think you're above the President of the United States?" But Jasmine did not answer. Instead, she let the question hang, heavy and poisonous, until it choked the room itself. Then, finally, she leaned forward, ever so slightly, her lips parting just enough for the microphone to catch the faintest whisper. "We'll see." 2 words, barely more than a breath. but they detonated like dynamite. The chamber froze. The supporters who had cheered fell silent. The reporters who scribbled stopped mid-sentence. Even the speaker's gavel hovered in the air, because in those two words lay the promise of revelation, the foreshadowing of something devastating, the threat that truth itself was about to break free. Trump's jaw clenched, his nostrils flared, and his hands tightened on the podium until the wood creaked beneath his grip. Jasmine leaned back, smile still etched across her face, eyes locked on his. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to shout. She had already claimed the moment. For the first time in the chamber that night, the world wasn't watching Trump. They were watching her. And deep down, Trump knew it. The first strike had been delivered. Not with fire, not with fury, but with silence. A smile and two words that would haunt him for the rest of the battle. The storm was only beginning, and Jasmine Crockett had just seized the lightning. But lightning is never just a spark. It is the beginning of fire. Jasmine lowered her hand to the folder resting on the desk, fingers brushing the edge as though caressing a hidden blade. The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. And then, calmly, deliberately, she spoke her first question. Mr. President, if your story is true, why do the official records from your own administration contradict your sworn testimony? The words cut like steel, precise and lethal. No preamble, no theatrics, just a scalpel sliding between armor plates. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Papers rustled. Cameras zoomed in, desperate to capture every flicker of reaction. Trump froze. It was brief, just a fracture of a second, but it was there. The hesitation, the stutter of a man caught off balance. The invincible mask slipped, and beneath it, the raw nerve of vulnerability pulsed in full view. And Jasmine saw it. She saw the crack, and she pressed harder. You swore before this body that you had no knowledge of the transfer, yet your signature appears here on the authorization. How do you explain that contradiction? Her hand tapped the folder, each touch a drumbeat of inevitability. The chamber leaned in. History leaned in. Trump's lips parted, but no words came at first. The silence was damning. For a man who thrived on dominance, silence was poison. And then, as if clawing back from the edge, he roared, "Lies, smears, fabrications from the radical left." His voice thundered across the hall, his fists hammering the podium like war drums. Theatrics surged back into play, anger to mask fear, volume to drown truth. He jabbed his finger toward Jasmine, his face reddening with fury. This woman is a disgrace, a fraud. She's here for fame, not facts. She should be ashamed to stand before me. The chamber exploded. Republicans leapt to their feet, clapping, shouting, chanting his name. The roar of their approval surged like a tidal wave, trying to wash away the sting of Jasmine's question. But Democrats sat upright, eyes sharpened. They had seen it, that flicker, that fracture, that single heartbeat where Trump's armor had cracked. And Jasmine, she did not yield. Her smile returned. Calm, sharp, deliberate, not mocking, not cruel, but certain. She leaned toward the microphone, her voice steady, each syllable deliberate. The truth doesn't fear questions, Mr. President, but you do. The roar dimmed. The cheering wavered, because the words struck deeper than his bluster could reach. Trump slammed the podium, his voice rising to a shriek. Don't you dare accuse me of fear. I am the strongest leader this nation has ever had. His words were fire, but the flames revealed the cracks. Each outburst, each insult, each personal attack only underscored the fact that he had not answered her question. Reporters' pens flew. Screens across America lit up with fresh headlines. Trump dodges Crockett's question. President explodes under pressure. And in living rooms, in cafes, in crowded streets, millions whispered the same thought. Why couldn't he answer? Jasmine sat back slightly, allowing his fury to burn itself out. Theatrics only work when unchallenged. She had challenged, and in his rage he had confessed. Not with words, but with fear. The chamber began to shift. The wave of Republican cheers lost momentum. Some faces in the crowd turned uncertain, their applause faltering, their loyalty questioned by the doubt that now gnawed at the edges of belief. Jasmine seized the moment. She leaned forward again, voice calm but razor sharp. Mr. President, the American people deserve clarity, not insults, not deflections, just clarity. So I ask again, why do the records contradict your testimony? Her words rang through the chamber, louder than the thunder of his anger. Because truth doesn't need volume, it needs precision. Trump staggered for breath, his chest heaving, his jaw clenched so tight the muscles quivered. He tried to speak, but the words tangled, twisted, broke apart. And in that moment, just that moment, he was smaller. The giant, reduced. The empire, shaken. Republicans forced another cheer, desperate to drown the image of their leader faltering. But it was too late. The moment was seared into memory, broadcast into every home, etched into the narrative of history. Democrats exchanged glances, glances filled with something they had not felt in a long time. Hope. Jasmine had drawn first blood, not by screaming, not by posturing, but by asking a single devastating question that tore at the foundation of his lies. She folded her hands calmly, her expression unwavering, as though daring him to try again. Trump glared back, his face twisted with rage, but behind his eyes lurked something he could not conceal. The thing he feared most. Weakness. And the chamber knew it. The nation knew it. He knew it. The battle lines had been drawn. The facade of invincibility had cracked. And Jasmine Crockett, calm, relentless, unstoppable, had just struck the first blow that would echo far beyond those marble walls. The counterstrike had landed, and the war was no longer his alone to command. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't finished. Not yet. Not when the sharpest blade was still sheathed. Slowly, deliberately, she reached down to the folder resting on the desk. Her fingers brushed its edge with the reverence of someone holding a weapon of destiny. Then, with one smooth motion, she lifted it high for all to see. A sealed document, stamped, classified, untouched by the light of public scrutiny. Until now. The chamber erupted in whispers. Reporters leaned forward, lenses stretching, microphones trembling. The nation itself seemed to inhale at once, as if every living room, every newsroom, every crowded bar had become part of the Capitol's air. Jasmine's eyes never left him. Her arm remained raised, the file suspended like judgment itself. Donald Trump's face blanched, the color drained, his skin turning pale beneath the glaring lights. For the first time in years, the man who boasted of never backing down looked as though the ground itself had betrayed him. The cameras saw it, zoomed in, magnified his faltering mask for millions to witness. "What is that?" Trump barked, his voice cracking with the edge of panic. It wasn't a question, it was a demand, desperate and frantic. Jasmine let the silence hang. Every second was a hammer blow. Every pause, a reminder that power was slipping from his grasp. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was calm, deliberate, steady as a blade slicing through armor. "This, Mr. President, is the file you never wanted this country to see." The words detonated. The chamber shuddered. Reporters scrambled, pens flying, cameras flashing like lightning. Trump staggered a step forward, hands gripping the podium, as though it were the only thing holding him upright. His eyes darted wildly, first to his allies, then to the cameras, then back to the folder raised above him like a torch. He shouted, voice raw with fury. "Fake! Fabricated trash! I know nothing about that file." But even as he spoke, the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Even as he pounded the podium, his knuckles whitened, not with strength, but with fear. And Jasmine? She smiled. Not a smile of triumph, but a smile of certainty. Because the truth doesn't need volume. It doesn't need theatrics. It only needs to exist. She lowered the file slowly, laying it on the table with a finality that echoed louder than his shouts. Then, leaning forward, she let the weight of her words settle over the chamber. "Inside this file are details you swore never existed. Documents your administration locked away. Signatures you claim were forged. Records that tell a story America was never meant to hear." The whispers turned to gasps. Papers fluttered to the ground from trembling hands. And across the nation, Television anchors stammered, struggling to narrate history unfolding in real time. Trump pounded the podium again, desperate, frantic. "This is illegal. She has no right to hold that. She's violating the law. She's..." But his voice cracked, broken under the weight of his own dread. The words came out jagged, choked, like a man drowning in the tide of inevitability. Republicans rallied, shouting, jeering, waving their arms in furious defense. But their voices rang hollow, because the image was already burned into the public eye. Trump's pallor, Trump's panic, Trump's fear, and the file he could not explain. Democrats leaned forward, their faces hardening with a grim satisfaction. They had known Jasmine was sharp. They had known she was fearless. But this was different. This was lethal. Jasmine placed both hands on the table, her posture unshakable. Her voice dropped to a chilling calm. "You told this nation you had nothing to hide. Yet here it is, hidden, sealed, buried. And the question, Mr. President, is not whether the truth will come out, but how long you think you can stand before it consumes you." A hush fell over the chamber. Even the loudest voices faltered, because the truth was no longer an idea. It was tangible, visible, undeniable. The file sat on the table like a ticking bomb, not yet opened, not yet unleashed, but already devastating. Trump gripped the podium tighter, sweat streaking down his temple. His mouth opened, but no words came. His chest rose and fell, shallow, uneven. And in that silence, the image of invincibility crumbled before the world. The cameras drank it in. The networks played it again and again, slow motion, frame by frame. The moment the man who once branded himself unbreakable broke, and Jasmine Crockett stood unflinching, the guardian of a truth too heavy for him to bear. For years he had wielded fear like a weapon, but now fear was his prison. The chamber knew it. The nation knew it. He knew it. And the war had tilted, because Jasmine Crockett had just placed the blade of truth against the very heart of his empire. The leaked file had surfaced, and the countdown to his reckoning had begun. But Donald Trump was not a man who surrendered. Cornered animals fight the hardest, and Trump, backed into a wall, bared his teeth. He slammed his palm against the podium, the sound cracking like gunfire across the chamber. His voice thundered, heavy with rage, but beneath it quivered a tremor of desperation. "This is fraud. This is theater, a pathetic stunt by a woman who craves the spotlight. She doesn't care about the truth. She cares about cameras, fame, and her 15 minutes." The chamber rattled with the venom of his words. His allies leapt to their feet, shouting, chanting, pounding their fists like a chorus of enraged soldiers defending a crumbling fortress. They echoed him word for word. "Fraud, liar, fake." Trump leaned forward, eyes burning, his finger stabbing the air toward Jasmine. "She is the liar here. She fabricates, she twists, she deceives. That file, fake. Her smile, fake. Her entire career, fake. She is nothing but a fraud parading in front of the American people." The walls shook with the violence of his accusations. For a moment it seemed the tide might turn, that the force of his fury might drown out the truth lingering in that file. But Jasmine Crockett did not waver. She stood calm, her posture unshaken, her gaze steady as stone. Every insult rolled off her like raindrops against steel. Her silence mocked his volume, her composure cut deeper than his rage. Finally, she leaned into the microphone. Her words slid out soft but sharp, each syllable precise as a dagger. "The louder a man screams, the more he fears being heard." The chamber froze. The sentence landed like a blade, slicing clean through the fog of his fury. Trump staggered, caught between rage and disbelief. He opened his mouth, but Jasmine pressed on before he could gather the storm again. "You call me a liar, Mr. President, but a liar cannot point to evidence. A liar cannot place documents on this desk and demand answers. Only the guilty shout to bury the truth. And you..." Her eyes locked on him, burning with fire. "You are shouting because you know what's inside this file terrifies you." Gasps thundered across the chamber. Cameras flashed like lightning, illuminating Trump's face. Sweat beading, jaw clenched, eyes darting. Theatrics, once his weapon, now betrayed him. Outside the Capitol, the reaction was instant. Social media ignited like a wildfire. Timelines filled with one question, repeated millions of times. Who really holds the power now? Clips of Jasmine's words flooded feeds. Memes of Trump's paling face spread with captions. Fear has a new name. The hashtags trended in seconds. Queer truth vs power. Kier, Crockett strikes. Yim, who is afraid? Inside, the battle raged on. Trump's fists slammed against the wood, his voice rising, his insults multiplying. Disgrace, traitor, lowlife, radical puppet. Each word cracked like thunder, but thunder without lightning is only noise. And Jasmine was lightning. She stepped forward, each movement deliberate, her eyes never leaving his. Her voice remained calm, controlled, slicing through the storm. You built your power on fear, Mr. President. Fear of immigrants, fear of the press, fear of the truth. But fear loses its grip the moment someone refuses to bow. Her words rolled across the chamber like fire across dry fields. Every Democrat sat straighter. Even some Republicans shifted uneasily, their eyes betraying doubt. Trump snarled, his hands shaking as he pointed again. Don't you lecture me about fear? I am power. I am the voice of this nation. But Jasmine's response came swift, her tone colder than steel. Power without truth is nothing but noise, and noise can never silence justice. The chamber erupted. Cheers from one side, jeers from the other, the gavel hammering furiously to restore order. But the lines had already shifted. The balance had already tilted. Because Trump's voice, though loud, had begun to sound desperate. And Jasmine's voice, though calm, carried the weight of inevitability. Reporters raced to push out headlines. Crockett's calm shreds Trump's fury. War of words turned psychological in explosive hearing. In homes across America, people whispered to one another, he's unraveling. She's cutting him to pieces. Who really leads this room now? And Jasmine knew it. She saw it in his eyes, the flicker of fear, the fracture of doubt. She leaned back, her hands folded neatly, her voice dropping to a quiet command. You can smear me all you want, Mr. President. Call me names, shout me down, drown the chamber in noise. But when the shouting stops, the evidence remains. And when the truth stands, your words collapse. Trump shook his head violently, mouthing words he could not form, rage choking him like a chain. He was a man grasping for control, clawing at air that no longer belonged to him. The chamber had witnessed it. The nation had witnessed it. The world had witnessed it. The psychological war was over before it began. Trump's fury had revealed his weakness. Jasmine's calm had revealed her strength. And outside, the people watching knew the truth. For the first time in years, it was no longer his voice that defined the room. It was hers. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't finished. She had already pierced the armor of power. Now she would strike at the heart of legacy. She leaned forward, her hand resting lightly on the sealed file. Her gaze never wavered, her voice slow, deliberate, weighted with the gravity of revelation. Mr. President, she said, her tone slicing through the air like glass, you've claimed your dynasty, your bloodline, your empire as unshakable proof of your strength. But the truth buried in these records, tells a different story. The chamber went silent. The roar of Trump's allies faded into uneasy murmurs. Even the gavel hovered midair, as if time itself had frozen to hear her next words. Jasmine lifted a single page from the file, holding it high for the cameras. The seal glimmered under the harsh lights, and then, with a voice steady as judgment, she declared, Donald Trump Jr. is not your biological son. The world seemed to stop. Gas tore through the chamber, sharp and violent. Reporters leapt from their seats, cameras flashing like a storm of lightning. Phones buzzed with breaking alerts as networks scrambled to plaster the headline across every screen in America. Jasmine Crockett drops bombshell in Congress. Trump dynasty question, is Don Jr. really his son? Trump's face drained of color. His jaw dropped, his eyes wide, his entire body stiffening as if struck by a mortal blow. And then the mask shattered. He slammed both fists onto the podium with a force that echoed through the marble chamber. "Liar!" he roared, his voice breaking into a primal scream. "Lies! Sick, disgusting lies!" His face burned crimson, sweat streaking down his temple, spittle flying from his lips as his fury consumed him. He pointed a trembling finger at Jasmine, his words tumbling out in rage. "How dare you? How dare you drag my family into this? You have no proof, no right. You are filth, filth!" The chamber erupted into chaos. Republicans shouted, pounding their desks, their voices straining to shield their leader from the unbearable weight of the accusation. Democrats leaned forward, stunned, their expressions torn between disbelief and grim recognition of the blow that had just been dealt. Jasmine, however, remained unmoved. Her face was calm, her eyes steady, her posture unshakable against the storm of his rage. And when she spoke again, her voice was quieter than his, but infinitely more powerful. "The proof, Mr. President, lies not in my words, but in these records. Records your lawyers sealed. Records you fought to bury. Records that reveal what you fear most. Your empire is not built on blood, but on lies." The chamber gasped again, louder this time, the sound rippling like thunder. Cameras zoomed in on Trump's trembling hands, on his ashen face, on the sweat glistening under the lights. For years he had built his myth on dynasty, his children paraded as symbols of legacy, his name branded as eternal. And now, with one sentence, Jasmine had struck at the very core of that illusion. Trump staggered back, gripping the podium as though it were the only thing keeping him from collapse. His voice cracked as he screamed again. "I am the father. I am the legacy. No one can take that from me." But the more he screamed, the weaker he looked. His fury exposed not strength, but terror, and the cameras captured it all. Outside, America fractured. On one side, his loyalists screamed, "Fake, witch hunt, fabrication." On the other, millions whispered, tweeted, and shouted, "What if it's true?" Social media ignited with frenzy. Memes, speculation, hashtags erupted like wildfire. Rish Trump dynasty exposed, Rush family secret, bloodline broken. News anchors stumbled through live coverage, their voices tight with shock. Experts were rushed onto screens, analysts scrambling to interpret what the revelation could mean. Inside the chamber, Jasmine held the page steady in her hand. Her voice did not waver, her words cutting deeper with every syllable. "You once said your children were your greatest achievement. You used them as shields, as proof of your greatness. But the truth tells another story, and the American people deserve to know whether their president is a man of honor or a man of deceit." Trump bellowed in fury, veins bulging at his neck, his body trembling with barely contained rage. But every scream, every insult, every denial only amplified the truth ringing in the air. Because rage does not erase evidence, and fury does not silence revelation. The chamber had seen the fear in his eyes. The nation had heard the crack in his voice. The world had witnessed the unraveling of a myth. And Jasmine Crockett stood firm, her figure bathed in the glow of cameras, her presence unshaken as she delivered the most devastating strike yet. The dynasty was crumbling. The illusion was burning. And for the first time, Donald Trump looked not like a conqueror, but like a man undone by his own secrets. But the chamber was not silent for long. Trump's rage reignited, boiling over into a torrent of insults and denials. He gripped the podium, his knuckles white, his voice cracking under the strain of fury. "You're disgusting, you're vile. Everything you say is a lie, a witch hunt, a disgrace. How dare you drag my family into this? How dare you question my blood, my legacy, my very name?" His shouts rattled the marble walls. His allies cheered in desperate unison, their voices trying to smother the suffocating truth that hung heavy in the air. But every echo of his fury felt weaker than the last. Like a man screaming to convince himself he still held control. And Jasmine Crockett had heard enough. She rose from her seat, her movements sharp, decisive, unstoppable. Her eyes blazed as she stepped closer to the microphone, her voice coiled like a spring ready to strike. Trump hurled another insult, his voice shaking. "You are nothing, Jasmine Crockett, nothing. You don't deserve to stand in the same room as me. And then it came. Her voice, a lightning bolt tearing the storm in half, roared through the chamber with unshakable fury. Quit your BS! The words detonated like an explosion. The chamber erupted. Gasps, shouts, and then something no one expected. Applause. At first it was a single clap, then another, then dozens. And within seconds the entire Democratic side rose to their feet, thundering applause echoing like rolling drums of revolution. But it didn't stop there. Lawmakers who had sat in silence for hours, who had hesitated to challenge him, who had feared the wrath of his voice, now they stood too. One by one, the chamber filled with the sound of clapping, of cheering, of voices shouting not in defense of Trump, but in praise of the woman who had silenced him. Cameras flashed wildly, capturing history in the making. The words spread instantly across the globe. Jasmine Crockett to Trump. Quit your BS. On social media, timelines exploded. Hashtags surged within seconds. Your quit your BS. Your Crockett shuts Trump down. You're the moment. Clips of the moment flooded the internet, played again and again, millions of times in minutes. And Trump, he froze. His face, once crimson with fury, now flushed deeper, blood rushing until his skin looked aflame. His lips trembled, his hands shook against the podium, his chest heaved with shallow breaths. But no words came. For the first time, the man who had built his empire on domination of words could not speak. He opened his mouth once, silence, closed it, opened again, still nothing. The words had abandoned him. And in that silence, Jasmine's voice ruled the chamber. She stood tall, her finger pointed like a blade toward him. Her words thundered again, not with volume, but with absolute conviction. You cannot drown the truth with insults. You cannot hide your fear behind lies. You cannot intimidate me or anyone else into silence. Not anymore. The applause swelled, shaking the chamber, echoing through the marble like an anthem. Even reporters in the press box, normally bound by rules of neutrality, clapped under their breath, unable to resist the tide of history unfolding before them. Trump's eyes darted wildly, seeking refuge, allies, anything to reclaim the room. But the room was no longer his. The weight of applause, the thunder of cheers, the roar of the people beyond those walls, it had all shifted. And he stood there, a man once untouchable, now trembling, silent, diminished. Outside, the nation boiled. Screens in Times Square replayed the moment on loop, crowds cheering in unison every time Jasmine's words struck. Quit your BS. College campuses erupted into chants. Bars and restaurants cheered as if their team had just won a championship. Even in living rooms, families shouted and clapped, united by the catharsis of watching power crumble before truth. Trump finally slammed his fist on the podium, forcing his voice to return. But the sound that came was hollow, ragged, almost pitiful. She's crazy, unhinged. She's just loud. The words fell flat, drowned beneath the tidal wave of applause and laughter. For once, his insults had no sting. For once, his words carried no weight. Jasmine's eyes narrowed, her voice steady as she delivered the final blow of the moment. History won't remember your insults, Mr. President, but it will remember this day, and it will remember who stood for the truth and who trembled before it. The chamber thundered again, applause rolling like thunder, shaking the very foundations of the Capitol. Trump gripped the podium, red-faced and shaking, unable to find the words that had once made him untouchable. And in that silence, in that paralysis, the world saw the truth. He was no longer the man in command. He was the man cornered, beaten not by force but by words he could not answer. Not. And Jasmine Crockett stood victorious in that moment, her words echoing far beyond the marble chamber, searing themselves into the conscience of a nation. Quit your BS. But the chamber itself did not surrender quietly. The eruption of applause had barely subsided when Trump's most loyal allies surged to their feet, their voices rising in frantic defiance. They shouted over one another, pointing fingers, waving papers, their words tumbling out in a desperate attempt to shield their leader. Out of order, one bellowed. She's violating protocol, screamed another. This is a circus. She must be silenced. Their cries clashed against the thunder of cheers, fracturing the chamber into chaos. The speaker's gavel slammed furiously, but the sound was swallowed whole by the storm. Jasmine stood tall at the eye of it all. She did not move. She did not flinch. Her presence itself was defiance, an unyielding figure against a sea of noise. Trump's allies crowded closer to the front, some pounding desks, others shouting procedural motions to strike her words from the record. Their goal was clear: erase the moment, bury the echo, drown her voice beneath rules and technicalities. But the echo could not be buried, not when the world outside was already roaring with it. On the streets, televisions and store windows replayed the moment again and again. Crowds gathered, chanting her words in unison like an anthem. In cafes and subways and crowded parks, strangers clapped and cheered, united by a line that had ripped through the veil of power. On social media, the fire spread without mercy. The hashtags surged to the top of every platform. Surety Jasmine for justice. Millions repeated it within minutes. Celebrities, activists, ordinary citizens, voices united across divides, proclaiming their allegiance to the woman who had dared to shout down a president. Back inside the chamber, the division sharpened into spectacle. Republicans shouted themselves hoarse, their faces red, their fists pounding like war drums. Democrats clapped, some chanting her name, others raising fists in solidarity. And in the middle of it all, Jasmine remained still, her silence louder than any cry. Trump's face twisted in fury as he pointed at her again. His voice cracked as he roared, "She should be removed. She should be censured. This woman is a disgrace to this institution." His allies echoed the demand, voices overlapping in a desperate chorus. "Remove her! Remove her!" The speaker's gavel hammered again and again, but the chamber refused order. It was no longer a place of decorum. It was a battlefield of raw willpower. And Jasmine? She finally leaned into the microphone, her voice steady, clear, unbroken. "Remove me if you must. Strike my words from the record if it makes you feel safe. But you cannot remove what every American has already heard. You cannot strike from memory what the people will never forget." Her words rolled across the chamber like a wave, drowning out the shouts of her opponents. Even those who had tried to silence her fell momentarily quiet, their eyes betraying the realization that the fight had already spilled beyond these walls. Because power inside the chamber no longer dictated power outside it, and outside the people had chosen. Networks cut live to massive crowds chanting in unison, "Quit your BS! Quit your BS!" Signs appeared in the streets within hours, hastily painted, carried high above heads. Car horns blared in rhythm with the chant, an anthem of defiance spreading like fire through the veins of a nation. Commentators tried to catch up, their voices breathless, their words failing to keep pace with the surge of history. One headline screamed across the bottom of the screen, "A chamber divided, a nation united. Jasmine, for justice, dominates America." Trump's fury deepened, his body shaking as he slammed his fist again. But the sound was drowned, buried beneath the unstoppable force of applause, chants, and cheers. His power, once absolute in the chamber, now felt fragile, brittle, crumbling under the weight of something he could not control. Legacy, narrative, perception. And Jasmine Crockett had seized them all. She folded her hands calmly, her eyes never leaving him, her voice dropping into a quiet final strike. "This chamber may be divided, Mr. President, but the people are not. They have chosen the side of justice, and they will not forget who stood against it." Her words landed like stone. The chamber hushed, if only for a moment, as though even the walls themselves leaned in to hear. Trump's allies shouted again, desperate to restart the storm, but the energy was fading, the momentum slipping from their grasp. Because the truth was undeniable. The chamber might have been divided, but beyond its marble walls a nation was rising, and their chant, louder, stronger, unstoppable, was no longer his name. It was hers. Jasmine for justice. But Donald Trump was not finished. Cornered, humiliated, stripped of control, he lashed out with the only weapon left to him: raw power. He snapped his fingers, and from the shadows of the chamber, his legal team surged forward. Men in dark suits, briefcases snapping open, papers flying onto the podium in a flurry of legal jargon. One of them, his chief counsel, raised his voice above the chaos. "Mr. Speaker, this hearing must be suspended immediately. The Congresswoman is in violation of federal procedure. Her statements are defamatory, her evidence illegally obtained. We demand this proceeding be struck down and adjourned at once." Trump slammed his palm against the podium for emphasis. His voice roared again, desperate and commanding. "This is a witch hunt, a sham, a political circus. I am the President of the United States, and I will not stand here while this chamber disgraces itself." The room shook with the force of his rage. His allies cheered, pounding their desks, screaming in support of his demand. Their chants merged into one: "Adjourn, adjourn, adjourn!" And then, with eyes blazing and fists clenched, Trump bared his final threat. "If this spectacle continues, I will invoke my executive authority. I will use every ounce of presidential power at my command to end this charade. Do you hear me? I will shut it down. Right here, right now." The chamber gasped. Reporters leaned forward, pens frozen midair. Because in that moment, the President of the United States had not only threatened Congress, he had declared war on it. The Speaker's gavel thundered in frantic rhythm, struggling to regain control. Voices collided, screams overlapping, the chamber descending into chaos once more. And yet, at the center of the storm, Jasmine Crockett rose. She stepped toward the microphone, her heels striking the floor like the toll of a bell. The room quieted, not because the noise subsided, but because her presence demanded it. She leaned in, her voice sharp, cold, slicing through the uproar. "No power is great enough to silence the truth." The chamber froze. The words echoed against marble walls, rang in the ears of every lawmaker, every aide, every reporter. They traveled beyond the chamber, carried by cameras into millions of homes, into streets alive with chanting, into hearts that craved defiance against fear. Trump's jaw clenched, his fist shook, but his roar faltered in his throat, because her words had landed, not just on him, but on the very idea of unchecked power he had built his empire upon. Jasmine straightened, her eyes burning with fire, her voice steady and unrelenting. "Mr. President, you can summon your lawyers. You can shout, you can threaten, you can cling to your title, but power is not a shield against justice, and it never will be." The chamber erupted, this time not in chaos, but in cheers. Applause burst from the Democratic side, swelling like thunder, spilling over as even independents joined in. The gavel tried again to suppress it, but the energy had already consumed the room. Trump pounded the podium once more, his voice ragged, his desperation unmasked. "I am the President! My word is law!" Jasmine turned toward him, her voice cutting through the roar. "Your word is not law. Your word is fear, and fear has no place in a nation built on truth." Gasps filled the chamber. The sentence was more than a rebuttal. It was a verdict, and Trump, for all his threats, had no answer. Outside, the reaction was volcanic. Crowds chanted in unison, their voices booming like an army. "No power silences truth. No power silences truth." On social media, Jasmine's line trended instantly, the words carved into the digital fabric of the nation. On "No Power Silences," truth joined "Rasha Jasmine for Justice" at the top of every feed. Clips of Trump's threat to use executive power played alongside Jasmine's defiant words, the contrast unmistakable. Rage versus calm, fear versus truth. Inside, Trump's lawyers scrambled, their papers rustling, their voices raised in vain protests. But the tide had shifted beyond their reach. The chamber was no longer debating law or procedure. It was witnessing history, the moment when truth stared down power and refused to blink. Trump gripped the podium with both hands, his face contorted, his body trembling with impotent rage. But Jasmine stood tall, unflinching, her eyes locked on him, her presence radiating the undeniable reality. He had threatened to use the power of the presidency itself, and she had broken it with a single sentence. The desperate counterattack had failed, and the war belonged to her now. But Jasmine Crockett was not done. For all the thunder she had unleashed, the storm still had one final bolt to strike. She glanced toward the chamber doors, a subtle signal unnoticed by most, but enough. Because at that very moment, the doors creaked open. All heads turned. The room shifted, murmurs rippling like an earthquake rolling beneath marble floors. And then a figure stepped inside. Not a lawyer, not a politician, a witness, a man who had walked beside Trump in corridors of power, who had signed documents, who had sat in closed-door meetings where secrets lived and truth was smothered. A man Trump never expected to see stand against him. The name tore through the chamber in whispers, gasps, disbelief. Some faces paled, others hardened in shock. But Jasmine did not flinch. She had orchestrated this moment with precision. The witness walked to the front, his steps heavy, the silence around him deafening. He took the oath, his hand trembling slightly, his eyes fixed not on the lawmakers but on Trump himself. And then, his voice broke the silence. "I was there. I saw it, and I brought the proof." The chamber exploded with gasps. Reporters nearly fell over themselves, cameras snapping like gunfire. Trump's body stiffened, his mouth opening and closing, like a man choking on air. The witness pulled out a folder, documents, receipts, signatures. Evidence. Undeniable, irreversible evidence. He laid them on the table, his voice steady now, carried by the weight of conscience. Donald Trump lied under oath. He authorized the transfers. He signed the orders. He gave the commands. And here is his signature. He held up a page, the ink shimmering under the lights, the name Donald J. Trump etched in black and white for the world to see. The chamber froze. No one moved. No one breathed. And then, chaos. Gasps turned to shouts, shouts to screams, voices colliding in a storm of disbelief and fury. The speaker's gavel pounded, but the chamber was beyond control, because the impossible had happened. Trump's denials, his years of bluster, his empire of lies, had been pierced by a single voice armed with truth. Jasmine leaned back, her arms crossed, her eyes locked on Trump. She didn't need to speak. The witness was the blade she had unsheathed, and he was cutting through the last of Trump's armor. Trump stumbled forward, his voice breaking into a desperate roar. "Liar! Traitor! You sold out! You... But his voice cracked, his fury sounding hollow against the weight of paper in the witness's hands. For the first time, his words were not weapons. They were whimpers. Republicans shouted, demanding the witness be silenced, calling him corrupt, compromised, bought. But the evidence was visible to all. Documents marked, signed, dated. Proof that could not be erased by noise. Reporters were already sprinting from the chamber, their voices breathless as they called into cameras. "Breaking news! A direct witness has testified against the president with signed documents in hand. This could be the knockout blow. Trump's credibility is collapsing." Social media ignited again, the hashtags colliding into a storm. The witness, our truth on paper, knockout blow. Outside the Capitol, the crowd surged louder, chanting Jasmine's name, chanting for justice, their voices merging into one unstoppable tide. And inside, Donald Trump was unraveling. His face was pale now, drained of its earlier fury, his lips trembling, his body stiff as though he could not move. He clutched the podium like a drowning man clinging to wreckage. But there was no rescue, not from this. Jasmine finally rose to her feet, her presence commanding the chamber once more. She stepped toward the microphone, her voice low, cutting through the noise like a blade. "The truth has spoken. The lies have ended, and the people can see you now, not as a leader, but as a fraud undone by your own hand." The chamber erupted again, but this time it was not chaos. It was thunder. Applause, cheers, chants rising to the ceiling, crashing down in waves that shook the very foundations of the Capitol. Trump stood there frozen, trembling, his empire collapsing around him, his legacy shattering under the weight of proof he could not deny. And Jasmine Crockett stood tall, her eyes never leaving him, her voice ringing with finality. "This is not my victory. This is not Congress's victory. This is the victory of truth, and truth does not bow to power. The witness lowered his head, his duty fulfilled, his conscience unburdened. The papers lay spread on the table, the ink glowing like fire under the lights, and the chamber knew, the nation knew, the world knew. The knockout blow had landed. Donald Trump was no longer untouchable. He was exposed, and the whole world was watching. Every major network had cut to the chamber hours earlier, but now the coverage reached a fever pitch. Screens in living rooms, diners, airports, and Times Square glowed with the image of a president undone. Commentators stumbled for words, their voices laced with disbelief as they narrated history in real time. We are witnessing the unraveling of a presidency live. The chyron at the bottom of the screen blazed across every channel. Trump exposed, witness testimony rocks the nation. In homes across America, families sat frozen, their forks abandoned, their conversations silenced. On social media, clips of the witness's testimony and Jasmine's strikes circulated at lightning speed. The hashtags burned across feeds. Crews are exposed. Das and Trump truth. Das his shattered legacy. Trump sat hunched at the podium, sweat streaking down his temple, his face pale, his lips trembling. The once boastful titan of power now looked hollow, stripped bare under the merciless glare of truth. He tried to speak, but the words clung to his throat. All that came was a rasp, a breath that sounded less like authority and more like defeat. Jasmine Crockett remained standing, eyes fixed on him, her presence steady and unyielding. She did not gloat. She did not smile. Her silence was enough, because in this moment, she didn't need words. The world was speaking for her. Commentators filled the airwaves with disbelief. This is a seismic collapse of political dominance, from populist hero to a man cornered by his own lies. The Trump mythos is cracking before our eyes. The chamber reflected the nation's divide. Trump's allies sat rigid, their faces pale, their mouths dry, unwilling to look at the evidence on the table. Some whispered frantically to one another, others stared blankly, as if realizing their careers were tethered to a sinking ship. Democrats sat straighter, their expressions grim but resolute. They had endured years of his noise, his dominance, his shadow. Now, for the first time, they saw him diminished, not by politics, but by truth. And Jasmine Crockett, standing tall at the center, was the flame that lit the collapse. Trump wiped his brow with a shaking hand. The camera zoomed in mercilessly, capturing every bead of sweat, every twitch of his jaw, every faltering breath. The image told a story clearer than any commentary could. The once mighty had fallen. For years, his supporters had called him invincible, a fighter who never lost, a man who bent reality to his will. But reality had turned against him. And now his legacy, the myth of the strong man, the hero of the people, was collapsing into dust. One commentator's voice trembled as the footage played on repeat. This is not the face of dominance. This is the face of a man watching his empire dissolve before him. Outside the Capitol, crowds erupted in chants. Some jeered his name, others cheered Jasmine's, but all recognized the moment for what it was. The day when the myth of invulnerability shattered. Trump leaned back in his chair now, his body sagging, his eyes unfocused. The anger that had once fueled him was gone, replaced with a hollow stillness. His lips moved silently, as though muttering to himself, as if searching for words that no longer came. For the first time in years, Donald Trump looked small, and Jasmine Crockett seized the silence. She stepped forward, her voice calm but cutting, carrying across the chamber, across the airwaves, across the nation. For too long, you wrapped yourself in power, believing it made you untouchable. For too long, you hid behind fear, thinking it would silence truth. But tonight, before this chamber, before this country, you are stripped of both. Power cannot save you. Fear cannot shield you. And truth has found you. Her words fell heavy, each one another stone in the crumbling wall of his legacy. The chamber erupted again, cheers roaring like thunder, echoing across the marble. Trump's allies shouted back, but their voices were weak, trembling, fractured. The world no longer believed them. The world had seen too much, and the image of Trump, sweating, trembling, slumped, burned across every screen. No spin could erase it, no denial could undo it. It was history now. The man who once claimed to be the voice of the people had been reduced to silence. The populist hero now looked like a man clinging to the wreckage of his own deceit, and the legacy he fought so hard to protect was unraveling live, under the gaze of millions. Jasmine stood motionless, her eyes steady, her presence unshaken. She was not just a challenger now. She was the victor, the breaker of myths, the woman who stared down power and did not blink. The chamber knew it, the nation knew it, the world knew it. Donald Trump's legacy was no longer a monument of strength. It was rubble, scattered under the relentless weight of truth. And in the heart of that rubble, a single figure stood tall. Jasmine Crockett. Her hands rested firmly on the desk before her, her shoulders squared, her gaze sweeping across the chamber that only hours earlier had trembled beneath Trump's shadow. Now it trembled beneath hers. She drew a breath, her voice clear, unflinching, rising above the chaos with the certainty of judgment. Justice never bows to power. The words reverberated like thunder, simple, undeniable, a declaration carved in stone, and the chamber erupted. Applause thundered through the air, rattling marble, echoing into every corner. Democrats leapt to their feet, clapping, cheering, their voices merging into a single roar. Even independents, once cautious, once silent, stood now, joining in the ovation that consumed the chamber like fire spreading across dry fields. Cameras captured every angle, every clap, every cheer. The networks ran the moment live, anchors' voices breaking with awe. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett delivers the final blow, the line that will be remembered for generations. On social media, her words exploded. Justice never bows ignited instantly, climbing alongside Dr. Jasmine for Justice, their flames consuming every platform. Millions repeated the line in posts, in chants, in captions, transforming it into a rallying cry. And Donald Trump? He sat slumped at the podium, his body drained, his face ashen, his hands trembling. The man who once commanded rooms with a single glare now seemed swallowed by the very walls around him. His eyes darted aimlessly, his lips pressed tight, his silence more damning than any admission. Because in that silence lived defeat. Jasmine did not look at him again. Her fight with him was finished. Her fight for justice, however, had only begun. She turned toward the chamber, her voice steady, her words deliberate, her presence unshakable. What happened here tonight is not about me. It is not about him. It is about the truth. A truth too long buried, a truth too long silenced, a truth that no power, no office, no title, no man can ever erase. The ovation swelled again, shaking the chamber, the gavel abandoned now as lawmakers and spectators alike surrendered to the tidal wave of history. Outside, the nation mirrored the chamber. Crowds chanted her name, carried signs high, their voices booming into the night. Jasmine! 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 Others shouted her words. Justice never bows. Justice never bows. It was no longer a chant. It was an anthem, and Jasmine Crockett had become its voice. She gathered the sealed file from the desk, holding it firmly in her grasp as she stepped back from the microphone. Her heels echoed against the floor as she turned toward the chamber doors. The roar followed her, rolling behind her like thunder chasing lightning. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing, their voices desperate to capture her reaction. But she didn't stop. She didn't turn. She walked with the steady grace of someone who knew her place in history had already been written. Behind her, Donald Trump remained motionless, a silhouette of defeat, a man undone. And before her, the doors opened wide. As she stepped through, the light of camera flashes poured over her, bathing her in a glow that felt less like spectacle and more like coronation. She emerged not just as a lawmaker, not just as an opponent, but as a symbol, the symbol of defiance, the symbol of justice, the flame that power could not smother. The crowd outside erupted as she appeared. They surged forward, their chants shaking the very steps of the Capitol. Some wept, some shouted, some lifted their fists in solidarity. And through it all, Jasmine walked forward, her chin high, her eyes unshaken. For in her presence, they saw more than a congresswoman. They saw the proof that justice, even against the fiercest of powers, could stand. The cameras captured the final image, the one that would live in history books, in murals, in the collective memory of a nation. Jasmine Crockett walking down the Capitol steps, the sealed file in her hand, the roar of a people at her back, the echo of her words blazing across the night sky. Justice never bows to power. And so the story closed, not with silence, not with compromise, but with the birth of a fire that could not be extinguished, because this was not the end. It was the beginning of a battle greater than one man, greater than one chamber, greater than one night. The beginning of a war for justice that would burn across the nation, and at its center, a woman who refused to bow, a woman who became the flame. A flame that no storm, no power, no legacy could ever put out. Jasmine Crockett walked into history that night, and history walked with her. In the end, the clash between Jasmine Crockett and Donald Trump was more than politics. It was the timeless struggle between truth and power. It reminded us that strength is not measured by titles or volume, but by the courage to stand firm when the world demands silence. Justice may stumble, it may falter beneath the weight of lies, yet it never bows. And when one voice dares to rise, it can ignite a fire that awakens millions. The lesson is simple but eternal. No legacy built on deceit can outlast the light of truth. If this story stirred something in you, don't scroll. Sit with it, share it, speak on it. Like, comment, and send it to someone who still believes truth deserves a microphone. Subscribe to Harrison Stories, where no silence goes unchallenged. Hit the bell, because the next chapter isn't safe. It's raw. And it might just change the way you see power. This story is a fictional dramatization inspired by real injustices and real courage. Any resemblance to